The Guardian of Serengeti, a tale of courage and unlikely friendship. The golden rays of the setting sun painted the vast expanse of Serengeti National Park in hues of amber and crimson. Majestic acacia trees stood silhouetted against the darkening sky, their branches stretching like fingers toward the heavens. The savannah buzzed with the sounds of life insects chirping their evening songs, birds calling to their mates, and somewhere in the distance, the haunting call of a hyena echoed across the plains. Among this symphony of wilderness, one figure stood out, a magnificent male lion with a thick mahogany mane that rippled in the gentle breeze. The locals called him Jabari, meaning the brave one in Swahili. Rangers and tourists alike spoke of him with reverence. He was the undisputed sovereign of these lands, the most formidable predator in the entire eastern region of the park. Jabari's muscular frame moved with practiced stealth through the tall grass. His amber eyes, sharp and calculating, were fixed on a small herd of Thompson's gazelles grazing near a watering hole about 50 yards ahead. The day had been scorching, and the evening brought with it a welcome coolness that stirred the predators from their daytime slumber. Hunger gnawed at Jabari's belly. He hadn't eaten in 3 days, and the lean times of the dry season were taking their toll. The gazelles remained oblivious to the danger lurking nearby. They dipped their heads to drink from the water, their slender legs poised for instant flight should a threat appear. But Jabari was too skilled a hunter to give away his position. Years of experience had taught him the art of patience, the cornerstone of a successful hunt. Marcus Odhiambo watched the scene unfold from his ranger vehicle, parked on a small rise about 100 yards away. At 35, Marcus was among the most experienced rangers at Serengeti National Park. His weathered face and calloused hands told stories of a life devoted to conservation, to protecting these wild creatures and their diminishing habitats. Born in a small village on the outskirts of Nairobi, Marcus had fallen in love with wildlife at an early age and had dedicated his life to their preservation. Marcus recognized Jabari immediately. He had been monitoring this particular lion for nearly 5 years, watching him grow from a young male challenging for territory to the dominant force he was today. There was something special about Jabari, a dignity in his bearing, an intelligence in his eyes that set him apart from other lions Marcus had encountered throughout his career. Through his binoculars, Marcus observed the lion's hunting technique with professional admiration. Textbook approach, he murmured to himself, noting how Jabari used the contours of the land to mask his movement, how he kept downwind of his prey. But then something unexpected happened. A young gazelle, perhaps more thirsty than cautious, wandered away from the herd, coming dangerously close to Jabari's position. The lion tensed, his muscles coiling like springs. Marcus knew what would come next. Jabari would abandon his stalking strategy and make a dash for the easy prey. And dash he did. With explosive power, Jabari burst from his hiding place, sending birds scattering into the sky. The gazelles bolted instantly, their bodies transforming into blurs of motion. But Jabari had calculated well. The young gazelle had strayed too far from the safety of the herd. It bounded desperately toward the water, perhaps instinctively seeking an escape route that wasn't there. What neither Jabari nor Marcus could have anticipated was the hidden drop-off at the edge of the watering hole. Years of erosion had carved out a steep bank, creating a deep pool that fed into a fast-moving stream. The gazelle, in its panic, managed to leap across this danger zone, but Jabari, heavier and focused solely on his prey, plunged straight into the treacherous waters. The shock was immediate. One moment Jabari was the epitome of predatory grace. The next, he was thrashing in water far deeper than anything he had encountered before. Lions are not natural swimmers. They can paddle across calm rivers when necessary, but deep, moving water presents a deadly challenge. Marcus jumped to his feet, binoculars still pressed to his eyes. No, "No, no," he whispered, watching in horror as the powerful lion struggled against the current. Jabari's roars of confusion and fear carried across the savannah, a sound so uncharacteristically vulnerable from such a mighty creature that it sent chills down Marcus's spine. The water closed around Jabari like a cold, unforgiving fist. His massive paws, designed for stalking silently across the savannah, now flailed uselessly against the current. The weight of his sodden mane dragged him downward, and panic and emotion foreign to this apex predator gripped him. His lungs burned for air as water filled his nostrils. The world above grew distant, a wavering image of light and sky that seemed to recede with each passing second. Marcus didn't hesitate. Training and protocol dictated that rangers should never interfere with the natural course of events in the wild, no matter how tragic. Nature had its own balance, its own cruel but necessary laws. But something deeper than training took hold of Marcus in that moment, a profound connection to this particular animal, and perhaps a recognition that this death would not be natural at all. The watering hole had been altered by recent floods, creating a hazard that would not normally exist. He radioed his position to headquarters. "This is Ranger Odhiambo at Sector 7. I have a code blue situation involving the male lion known as Jabari. He's drowning at Maji Pool. I'm going in after him. Send backup immediately." The radio crackled with protests from his supervisor, but Marcus had already tossed it aside. He kicked off his boots, stripped off his heavy ranger jacket, and grabbed a length of rope from his vehicle. Heart pounding in his chest, he sprinted toward the watering hole. By the time Marcus reached the edge of the water, Jabari had disappeared beneath the surface. Without a second thought, Marcus dove into the murky depths. The cold water shocked his system, momentarily stealing his breath. Visibility was poor, silt and sediment clouded the water, forcing Marcus to rely more on touch than sight. He kicked deeper, scanning the gloom for any sign of the lion. Lungs beginning to burn, he was about to return to the surface when he spotted a dark shape below him, Jabari's massive form, now still drifting with the current toward the bottom of the pool. With powerful strokes, Marcus swam downward. The pressure increased against his eardrums as he descended, but he ignored the discomfort. Reaching the lion, he wrapped his arms around Jabari's chest, just behind his front legs. The animal was impossibly heavy, at least 400 pounds of waterlogged muscle and bone. Marcus kicked with all his might, fighting against both Jabari's weight and his own desperate need for oxygen. For a terrifying moment, he thought they might both remain trapped in the watery grave. But then his survival instinct took over, releasing reserves of strength he didn't know he possessed. Inch by excruciating inch, they rose toward the surface. Marcus's vision began to blur, black spots dancing before his eyes. His legs felt like lead, his arms screaming with the effort of holding onto the lion. When they finally broke the surface, Marcus gasped for air, filling his lungs with precious oxygen. He maintained his grip on Jabari with one arm while using the other to swim toward the shore. The lion remained motionless, showing no signs of life. With one final surge of energy, Marcus dragged Jabari onto the muddy bank. The lion lay still, water streaming from his magnificent mane, once the symbol of his power and virility, now plastered against his neck like a sodden rag. "Come on, big guy," Marcus panted, positioning himself beside the lion's massive rib cage. "Don't give up on me now." Marcus knew he had only minutes to act before brain damage would become irreversible. The absurdity of the situation wasn't lost on him. Attempting cardiopulmonary resuscitation on a 400-pound apex predator was not covered in ranger training. But his years of wilderness emergency medical training kicked in, and he adapted the technique as best he could for his unusual patient. He placed both hands on Jabari's chest, just behind the front legs where he could feel the lion's heart beneath layers of muscle. With steady, forceful compressions, he attempted to restart the great heart that had fallen silent. Water trickled from Jabari's nostrils and mouth with each compression. 1, 2, 3, 4, Marcus counted aloud, the sound of his voice strange in the gathering dusk. Birds had gone silent, as if the entire savannah was holding its breath, watching this extraordinary scene unfold. After 30 compressions, Marcus moved to Jabari's head. This was the most dangerous part of being unconscious. A lion's reflexes could be lethal. With careful movements, he extended the lion's neck, opening his airway. Choosing not to attempt direct mouth-to-snout resuscitation on the predator, Marcus instead used a modified technique, cupping his hands to direct forceful breaths toward the lion's nostrils. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as Marcus alternated between chest compressions and breathing. His arms ached, his back screamed in protest, but he refused to stop. Sweat mingled with water on his brow, dripping onto Jabari's still form. "Come on," he urged between breaths. "Fight, Jabari. You're the brave one, remember?" 5 minutes passed with no response. 10 minutes. Marcus began to lose hope. His movements became mechanical, driven by stubborn determination rather than optimism. The sun had almost disappeared behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the landscape. Then, just as darkness began to claim the savannah, a miracle occurred. Beneath Marcus's hands, Jabari's chest spazzed. A violent cough racked the lion's body, expelling water in a sudden rush. Marcus quickly backed away as Jabari's massive head lifted, amber eyes flickering open in confusion. The lion rolled onto his side, coughing and retching as more water expelled from his lungs. His breathing came in ragged gasps, but each breath grew stronger than the last. Marcus watched in awe as life returned to the magnificent creature he had pulled from death's grasp. Jabari's gaze found Marcus, and in that moment, something profound passed between man and bestial recognition, perhaps, or simply the strange communion of two living beings who had stared into the abyss together and returned. From his medical kit, Marcus retrieved an emergency injection of antibiotics and anti-inflammatory medication. Approaching cautiously, he administered the shot to Jabari's flank. The lion flinched but made no move to attack, his eyes never leaving Marcus's face. Night had fallen by now, bringing with it the bone-deep chill of the African wilderness. Marcus knew hypothermia posed a serious risk to the weakened lion. He returned to his vehicle and retrieved emergency thermal blankets, as well as his own spare jacket. With slow, deliberate movements, he draped these over Jabari's wet form. "Help is coming," he told the lion softly. "But I'm not leaving you." True to his word, Marcus built a small campfire nearby and settled in for the night, knowing that predators might be attracted to the scent of a weakened lion. He kept his rifle close, though he hoped he wouldn't need to use it. Throughout the long hours of darkness, he periodically checked on Jabari, adjusting the blankets and offering soothing words that the lion couldn't understand but seemed to respond to nonetheless. By dawn's first light, Jabari's condition had improved dramatically. His breathing had stabilized, and his eyes followed Marcus's movements with greater alertness. When the ranger approached with water in a shallow pan, the lion drank eagerly, strength visibly returning to his powerful frame. The radio on Marcus's belt crackled to life. "Ranger Odhiambo, this is Dr. Kimathi with the Wildlife Response Team. We're approaching your coordinates, ETA 5 minutes. What's the status of the lion?" Marcus smiled as he watched Jabari struggle to his feet, shaking off the thermal blankets. "Alive," he replied simply. "Very much alive." The Wildlife Response Team arrived in a cloud of dust, their vehicles grinding to a halt at a respectful distance from where Jabari now stood on unsteady legs. Dr. Amara Kimathi, the park's lead veterinarian, observed the scene through binoculars before approaching Marcus. "I honestly didn't believe the report," she admitted, her voice tinged with awe. "You actually resuscitated a full-grown male lion." Marcus shrugged, suddenly self-conscious about his actions. "I couldn't just watch him drown." Dr. Kimothy nodded thoughtfully. "Well, your unorthodox intervention seems to have been successful. He appears alert, responsive. The antibiotics you administered should prevent pneumonia, but I'd like to sedate him for a thorough examination before we relocate him to a safer area." As the team prepared the tranquilizer, Jabari turned toward Marcus. The great beast took several halting steps in his direction, muscles still weak from his ordeal. The response team tensed, raising their rifles as a precaution. "Hold your fire," Marcus commanded, raising his hand. Something in Jabari's demeanor told him this wasn't an attack. The lion stopped just a few feet from Marcus. Then, in a gesture that would be discussed around campfires and ranger stations for years to come, Jabari lowered his massive head and emitted a deep, rumbling sound, not quite a purr, not quite a growl, but something in between. It was a sound that vibrated in the air between them, acknowledging what had transpired. After a moment that seemed suspended in time, Jabari turned away, allowing the veterinary team to approach with their equipment. The tranquilizer dart found its mark, and within minutes, the mighty lion succumbed to its effects. The examination confirmed what Marcus had hoped: no water remained in Jabari's lungs, and his vital signs were strong. The team fitted him with a tracking collar before transporting him to a protected area of the park, away from the dangerous watering hole. In the days that followed, Marcus threw himself back into his regular duties, trying to put the extraordinary incident behind him. His superiors had mixed reactions. Some praised his courage. Others reprimanded him for taking such risks with a dangerous predator. But Marcus found it difficult to regret his actions, especially when daily reports from the tracking collar showed Jabari regaining his strength and reclaiming his territory. 2 weeks after the rescue, Marcus was conducting a routine patrol along the eastern boundary of the park. The afternoon was warm, birds soaring on thermals high above the Savannah. He had just finished documenting a family of elephants when a movement in his rearview mirror caught his attention. There, padding silently about 50 yards behind his vehicle, was Jabari. The lion's mane had dried and fluffed back to its former glory, his stride once again powerful and confident. His collar's tracking data indicated he had been following Marcus's patrol route for the past hour. Astonished, Marcus stopped his vehicle and watched as Jabari settled into the shade of a nearby acacia tree, his amber eyes fixed on the ranger. There was no aggression in his posture, no predatory tension, just a calm watchfulness that seemed almost protective. "Well, I'll be damned," Marcus whispered. The following days established a pattern that defied explanation. Whenever Marcus ventured into the eastern sector of the park, Jabari would appear, sometimes maintaining a distance of 100 yards, other times coming close enough that Marcus could hear the lion's heavy breathing. The behavior confounded the park's biologists and rangers alike. "It's unprecedented," Dr. Kimothy remarked after reviewing weeks of observation reports. "Lions have complex social structures within their pride, but this kind of interspecies bond, especially with humans, simply doesn't happen in the wild." Yet happen it did. Jabari seemed to have appointed himself Marcus's guardian, a role reversal that both amused and humbled the experienced ranger. The first test of this unusual arrangement came during the 3rd week after the rescue. Marcus was documenting evidence of poachers who had breached the park's northern boundary when he encountered 3 men armed with high-powered rifles. They had clearly not expected to run into a ranger and raised their weapons threateningly. "This doesn't concern you, Ranger," the leader called out in heavily accented English. "Walk away and live another day." Marcus stood his ground, his own rifle at the ready, though he was outnumbered. "I'm afraid I can't do that. You're in a protected area, hunting endangered species. Surrender your weapons, and we can resolve this peacefully." The standoff might have ended tragically for Marcus had it not been for a bone-chilling roar that echoed across the plain. Jabari emerged from the tall grass like a golden specter, his teeth bared in a fearsome snarl. The poachers' attention shifted instantly, terror replacing aggression on their faces. "Lion!" one of them screamed, firing wildly in Jabari's direction. The shots went wide as the men scrambled back to their vehicle. Jabari didn't pursue them, he simply stood his ground beside Marcus, a living barrier between the ranger and those who threatened him. By the time backup arrived, the poachers had fled, leaving behind evidence that would later lead to their arrest. News of the incident spread quickly throughout the Park Service and eventually reached the outside world. Journalists clamored for interviews, wildlife documentary teams set up camps hoping to capture footage of the unusual partnership, and tourists specifically requested Marcus as their guide in hopes of glimpsing the famous lion who had befriended a human. Marcus did his best to downplay the situation. "Jabari is a wild animal," he would repeatedly explain. "He's not a pet, not a friend in the human sense. Whatever connection we share doesn't change his fundamental nature." Yet privately, Marcus couldn't deny the profound bond that had formed. On quiet evenings when he camped in the field, Jabari would often appear at the edge of the firelight, settling down to keep silent vigil through the night. Sometimes, when they were alone with no witnesses, Marcus would speak to the lion, sharing thoughts and concerns he'd never voiced to another soul. "My wife doesn't understand why I choose this life," he confided one starlit evening. "Living in the wilderness, away from comforts, always in danger. But how could I explain it to her? This feeling of being part of something ancient and true." Jabari watched him with those intelligent amber eyes, and Marcus could almost believe the lion understood. 6 months passed, and the unique relationship between Marcus and Jabari became an accepted phenomenon within the park. Rangers no longer raised their rifles in alarm when the lion appeared during Marcus's patrols, and researchers had compiled extensive data on this unprecedented behavior. Dr. Kimothy's team published a preliminary paper in a prestigious wildlife journal, suggesting that near-death experiences might create neurological changes that affected behavior in ways not previously documented in large predators. The scientific community responded with skepticism, but those who witnessed the bond firsthand knew there was something special at work, something that defied easy explanation. For Marcus, however, the situation presented a growing dilemma. He understood better than most the importance of maintaining natural behaviors in wildlife. Jabari's focus on him meant the lion spent less time with his pride, less time establishing and defending territory against rival males. While the tracking data showed Jabari still hunted successfully and occasionally rejoined his pride, his behavior had undeniably changed. "We might need to consider relocating you to another sector," his supervisor suggested during a staff meeting. "Give Jabari a chance to return to normal lion behavior." The suggestion made practical sense, but Marcus felt an unexpected resistance to the idea. Their connection had become important to him, a reminder of why he had chosen this path in life: to protect these magnificent creatures and the wilderness they inhabited. Before a decision could be made, nature intervened in its own way. The seasonal rains came early that year, transforming dusty plains into lush meadows bursting with new life. The abundance of prey animals scattered across the expanded territory meant the lions spread out as well, following the herds. For nearly 2 weeks, there was no sign of Jabari. The tracking collar showed he had moved to the far western boundary of the park, an area Marcus rarely patrolled. The separation brought conflicting emotions: professional satisfaction that the lion was resuming natural patterns, but also a peculiar sense of loss. When Jabari finally reappeared one misty morning, he wasn't alone. Trailing behind him was a lioness with 3 small cubs, cautiously following their father as he led them to where Marcus's vehicle was parked beside a waterhole. Marcus watched in astonishment as Jabari guided his family to a safe distance, then approached the vehicle alone. The lion's mane was matted with dried blood evidence of a recent fight, likely with another male who had threatened his cubs. "You've been busy," Marcus remarked softly. Jabari settled into the grass, amber eyes fixed on Marcus with the same watchful attention as always. Behind him, the lioness kept her cubs close, her posture tense but not aggressive. It seemed as though Jabari was introducing his family, sharing with them the strange human he had come to trust. The moment crystallized something for Marcusa, understanding of what his role truly was, not as a friend or companion to this wild creature, but as a steward of the land that sustained Jabari and countless other beings. The lion hadn't become more human through their connection. Rather, Marcus had been reminded of his own animal nature, his place in the great web of life that connected all living things. As the seasons turned and years passed, the legend of Marcus and Jabari grew. Documentaries were filmed, research papers published, and conservation donations to Serengeti National Park increased dramatically. The story of a ranger who saved a drowning lion, only to gain a lifelong protector, captured imaginations worldwide. Reality, as always, was more nuanced than legend. Jabari's appearances became less frequent as his pride grew and the demands of protecting his expanding territory increased. Still, he would appear unexpectedly during Marcus's patrols, sometimes after months of absence, materializing from the tall grass like a golden ghost, accompanying the ranger for hours before disappearing again. 5 years after the rescue at the watering hole, Marcus received a promotion to Chief Conservation Officer for the entire Serengeti region. The position meant less time in the field and more responsibilities coordinating anti-poaching efforts, habitat preservation, and community education programs. He accepted with mixed feelings, knowing his direct connection to the wilderness would be diminished. On his final patrol as a field ranger, Marcus visited all his favorite locations within the park, the ancient baobab tree that had sheltered him during countless storms, the rocky outcrop where he had witnessed his first lion birth, and finally, the watering hole where he had pulled Jabari from the depths. The place had changed over the years. Park management had installed safety barriers to prevent similar accidents, and educational signs told the story of the famous rescue. Marcus sat in his vehicle, watching the afternoon light play across the water's surface, lost in memories. A familiar sound broke his reverie, the deep rumbling call of a male lion in his prime. Marcus turned to see Jabari standing atop a nearby ridge, his silhouette regal against the setting sun. Though the lion was older now, with scars marking his face and flecks of gray in his magnificent mane, he remained an imposing figure, the embodiment of wild strength and dignity. Marcus stepped out of his vehicle and stood facing the lion. For a long moment, they regarded each other across the distance, man and beast, each shaped by their extraordinary encounter years before. Slowly, deliberately, Marcus raised his hand in a gesture of farewell. Jabari watched, motionless, except for his tail swishing gently back and forth. Then, as if understanding, the lion raised his massive head and loosed a roar that echoed across the Savannah, sound that spoke of freedom and fierce joy, of life embraced in all its savage beauty. When the echo faded, Jabari turned and padded away, disappearing into the golden grass that gave the region its name. Marcus watched until the last flick of the lion's tail vanished from sight, knowing in his heart that their paths might never cross again. Yet something endured beyond their physical connection, a reminder that in this vast, indifferent universe, unexpected bonds can form between the most unlikely creatures. That sometimes, in saving another, we discover the best parts of ourselves. Marcus returned to his vehicle and started the engine. Tomorrow would bring new responsibilities, new challenges in the ongoing struggle to preserve this precious wilderness. But tonight, as stars began to appear in the darkening sky, he carried with him the memory of amber eyes watching over him, of a wild heart beating in tandem with his own. In the years that followed, rangers would occasionally report sightings of an aging lion following their vehicles at a distance, particularly when they patrolled the eastern boundaries. The scientific community debated whether it was truly Jabari or simply normal territorial behavior misinterpreted through the lens of a compelling story. Marcus never weighed in on these discussions. He knew what he had experienced, a connection that transcended explanation, a moment when the artificial boundary between human and animal had briefly dissolved, revealing the shared essence that unites all living beings. And sometimes, on quiet nights beneath the vast African sky, he would think of Jabari roaming free across the savannah, guardian of his pride and the wilderness they called home. In those moments, Marcus understood that their parallel lives, though separated by the unbridgeable gulf between species, had been enriched by their brief intersection, a reminder that even in the wild, perhaps especially in the wild, life's most profound lessons come through connection, compassion, and courage.